Okay. Could we get started here? Get everybody in? This is the last session of the afternoon, with the exception of Amy's wrap-up. And this is really, for the path forward, the business case for creating a safety culture, what's needed. And this is really very important from the industry's perspective of how to get back to work. And the panel represents different people from different points of view. Chuck Davidson from Noble Energy, which is one of the leading independents. Gary Luquette from Chevron North America, who has been a real industry leader in terms of the industry's response. Lou Raspino, who is the president and CEO of Pride, a large drilling company and also head of the International Association of Drilling Contractors. Eric Smith is the clinical finance professor. I'm not quite sure what clinical finance is, but anyway. Okay. At Tulane. And Kent Wells is the group senior vice president for BP's Global Deepwater Response. And so that's the crew. We're going to use the same sort of format that we used for the policy panel this morning, which is to put questions to the group and then move it across. And so I guess the first question, which is kind of general questions, since April 20th, what changes has the industry made since the Macondo accident? And what are you looking at to go forward? What's outstanding? What's left to be done? Sure.
Well, Robin, I think first of all, as we've heard from prior speakers, many of them have touched on a number of things that has happened. But, you know, as I think about it, clearly, while the industry initially, you know, believed that they were dealing with a one-off event, I think as more of us thought through it and looked at the ways that we can improve our own operations, our processes, and organization, there's been a huge number of things done. Some within individual companies, some in response to the requirements that Director Bromwich talked about as well. But in my mind, and I know everybody will touch on a number of areas, it is in two big areas. One is just in preparation, and then the other is in response. The preparation piece of it just has to do with every aspect of how we go through and design a well, and do it in a way that we're thinking about reducing risk and mitigating risk. And also as part of the preparation process, actually going through and as a term that we use, you know, drill well on paper, you actually go through and practice drilling a well. And so there's a number of things you can do in the preparation. And then the response capabilities, we've just heard so much about what the industry is doing in terms of containment, in terms of spill response, of equipment capabilities, and all that is building up and is growing every day. And then again, I'll leave it to the rest of the group to talk about a number of things in terms of third-party verifications. Again, all along the trail of trying to do a greatly improved job of identifying risks ahead of time and finding ways to mitigate or eliminate them before you ever even get ready to drill a well.
Gary?
Well, you mentioned the joint industry task groups in your opening remarks, Robin, and there's been a tremendous amount of work that's been done since the first team was formed in early May. Industry took a three-pronged approach to the opportunity. There are opportunities in the area of prevention, opportunities in the area of intervention, and then opportunities in the area of recovery. In the event prong one and prong two fail you, then you need to have improved capability of recovering oil. But I think early on when we came together as an industry group, the first revelation we had was the best way to deal with an oil spill is never to have one. And so the early work went into the area of prevention, and that is, we've heard some suggestions to some of that work today. Improved well designs, looking at secondary and tertiary barriers and protections, looking at the critical interface of the BOPs and the ROVs, and then moving into intervention and looking at cap and stacks. And Clay Vaughn showed some of the things that marine well containment company has done in the area, being able to intervene in the unlikely event you have another incident, and then finally learning from all of the things that BP learned through the Macondo response and trying to improve surface response, improvement in surface response. What I wish is we would have an opportunity to demonstrate all of the improvements that we've made. Everything thus far has been design and preparedness, but we would very much like an opportunity to demonstrate all this enhanced capability by getting permits and getting back to work. And obviously that's what we're anxiously awaiting for.
Well, just kind of add to this, I do not get the impression that the public understands since April 20th. A lot of people it's a freeze frame that day, and they don't understand a lot of the changes that have actually taken place. Is that, do you think that's a fair assessment?
Well, I'm sure it is. There's been a lot of communication, but most of the communication has been with policymakers and with the regulator by necessity. But I do think there is an opportunity for this industry. I think there was a missed opportunity before Macondo in this industry to get our story out as to just what kind of wonderful things we're doing. I think everybody in the public understands the complexities of going to the moon. What people don't realize is that some of the complexities in drilling in 10,000 foot of water are probably, equal to and challenge to what NASA has been doing. But I'm sure there's an opportunity for us to do a lot better. And I'm sure industry will, as we kind of get the permitting process rolling again and get this industry back to work, to take our message to the public.
From the very beginning of this crisis, what we saw was a better recognition of the entire industry, operators, drillers, service contractors, about the interdependence on each other. From coming together on committees that Gary led several of those to try to put together a plan to make sure this doesn't happen again, but more importantly to reevaluate procedures of what we do together as a team on a go-forward basis. The drilling industry over the last several decades has evolved from a turnkey industry to a show up with the rig and the people and take directions industry. And I think what we all understand now is that we can't do that. Our people just need to be more of a partnership with the operator and have a better understanding of what's going on in the well. And we all know that a drilling contractor can easily be recognized by the press and by the outside world as being a part of the negligence or a part of the problem. And so we're telling our people, you have to be part of the solution. And one of the things we're finding just with open arms, the operators are saying we need to work together. We need to work together. They're making us work a lot harder on the front end and all during the drilling of a well to make sure the BOP is as good as it can be, and then check it again, and then check it again, and then one more time just for safety. And making sure our people have all the credentials and all the training that they need. But more importantly, there's just a recognition that everybody's in this together. And I think from the day of Macondo forward, I think that's a gigantic change in the industry.
Do you think the industry was much more fragmented before, and there wasn't that sense of shared purpose and responsibility?
I don't think it meant to be, because the industry has always worked in kind of a partnership arrangement where everybody was in it all together. But maybe we got just a little bit relaxed where everybody was doing their part and not quite understanding the whole. I mean, we tell our people, I've been on the phone with most of our rigs now, and I'm finishing the circuit right now, that you are responsible for the safety of the rig and the safety of the people. Nobody else. Nobody. If you want to shut the rig down, you shut it down. If the company man's going to scream at you, give him my business card, and we'll go see his boss together, and we'll see who wins that argument. And my people say, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I promise you, these gentlemen want me to do that, because you want the backup in safe thinking. And so we say, I'll give you an award for shutting the rig down, even if you're wrong. Even if you're wrong, because the consequences of shutting it down and being wrong are minor. The consequences of not shutting it down and being wrong, we see it. And so our people feel a new empowerment, and I feel that that's welcomed by all of our customers, even encouraged and demanded by all of our customers.
Well, I guess my thoughts are a little bit different. I see this sort of exposure to a new dynamic regulatory environment as a major development that didn't exist prior to this, or at least it was a much more deliberate process. This reminds me more of an EPA type of environment where we ratchet things up bit by bit. As soon as people get comfortable, we ratchet it again. One example of that, after the Exxon Valdez incident, you saw a shift, concerted shift, including the European countries, to double-hull tankers, and a phased-in approach. You didn't see a moratorium on drilling. And to me, that's a big change. I don't know that it's bad or good, but it's a definite shift from the traditional approach.
If you look at history in different industries, it took a crisis or a major event to cause step changes. And unfortunately, we've had a crisis here, but I do think it's brought our industry together. You asked what's changed. I think there's been an unbelievable amount of learning. I like what Chuck said about understanding about risk, how a number of things can go wrong and can put in a very bad place. We've been involved with Gary on the Joint Industry Task Forces, and in the 30 plus years I've been involved, I've never seen us come together quite so powerfully. Very committed to we're going to make a real difference. And I thought Gene said it well in the previous session where he talked about equipment, processes, and people. And this is all about prevention. I'm with Gary. We ought to spend all our time focused on making sure this never happens again. We learned a lot about how to respond as well, but what do we do to make sure it doesn't happen? And we've done a lot around BOPs. We've done a lot around processes, well-designed, cementing, etc. And I think in the last session there was also a big topic around people and how do we get the competency up, not only of the people we have, but how do we expand it? And I know some of our companies are involved going back all the way into elementary and high schools, getting kids interested in science. So they'll ultimately go to a university where they'll get an engineering or a technical degree that then can come into our industry. And of course, that doesn't help us in the short term. That's the longer term. I think in the short term, we're going to have to get quite creative around how do we take the tremendous experience we do have, marry it with a not so educated younger generation and accelerate that learning. And that is a big challenge for us. But I think there's been a tremendous amount of learning happen. I think we've made a lot of changes already. We're still working on some. And what I sense differently, I know we're committed to continuing in a continuous improvement process going forward so we don't stop 2 years from now when we sort of get to a better place. We're going to keep working on it. I sense that. I know that's our commitment in our company, and I believe it's in the whole industry.
Let me kind of following up on Kent's comment, but this question about how the industry works with the government to make the industry safer. I mean, the offshore industry is one of the most largest, most capital intensive, most technologically advanced industries on earth, anywhere. And you're asking 1,100 people along the Gulf Coast to regulate this staggering industry, which has enormous velocity of change. And you could see some of the presentations, the level of complexity. And it's not just people. How can the government and the industry, and unless the industry has a good regulator, this isn't, there's going to be more confusion and people bumping into each other, and we're not going to move forward. And the question is, how do you move forward and give the public confidence? Well, it seems to me this is a very, very central question of how do we get a strong regulator on the other side. I'm not being critical of Mr. Bromwich, but it's just how do you get the capabilities and the technical capabilities? And this costs real money.
Well, I think, first of all, I really agree that in order for the public to have confidence, they're going to have confidence in not only the regulator, but also the industry. So it's a joint, shared responsibility to regain that confidence. The regulator cannot be everywhere, cannot be on every well, watching every operation. So I think part of it is to make sure that there's a template of procedures that everyone has agreed to, that they know, they can that is part of being followed, so that you're doing things through a template. Perhaps what we're struggling with right now is we're building those templates. Maybe we're building the template for getting a permit through, but hopefully we won't do this one well, because there just isn't enough people to get this industry back to the pace that we all want it to be in order to develop the resources. So part of it is having very good templates, procedures, Yes, it's going to take more people, and it's going to take talented people. It's a very technical business. It's very sophisticated. The drilling is constantly changing. And as a result, our government is going to have to provide the resources, the financial resources to the agency to bring those people in. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be slow, some of the things that we're experiencing today.
Gary?
It's a real challenge, Robin, because there was stress on the system before Macondo. And with what I think we're hearing from the director and from the Secretary of Interior, is they want to do a lot more due diligence, not just on the front end, the permitting process, but a lot of verification on the back end, actually in the field. And it's a problem because they have difficulty in attracting qualified people. They can't compete, or at least they haven't in the past elected to compete with industry on salary. And so to attract people into a government job when there's higher paying jobs in the industry is a real challenge. I think industry can step up and actually help a great deal in this space. I think there are opportunities and this happened in the North Sea post the Piper Alpha disaster, where industry seconded a lot of experts into the regulator to help with the new safety case regime that they had there. Again, the problem we're having here is industry can offer to help, but there's a tremendous amount of scrutiny right now on how close the regulator and industry get. They've been accused of being too cozy in the past. So, every time we offer to help, it seems like anything other than money to get their own resources might be viewed as being, in collusion or something like that. So it is a real challenge. But I think in the end, if the government is very serious about making a step change in organizational capability, it's going to have to come with industry's involvement. And I would suggest, a secondment program where we could get some of our experienced people to go in and help them and bolster up their staff and kind of help them until they were able to recruit and train and get their own staff up and running. And again, this happened in the North Sea some 20 odd years ago after Piper Alpha.
But one of the questions also comes up is that, as I say, it's not just people. It's information processing, and having guys with a bunch of even really smart guys with staplers and rubber stamps, they're not going to make much progress. They need really good tools. Would you be prepared to provide some of those tools?
Well, our industry today is very instrumented, and most of those instruments now are streaming real-time information to the operators and to the drilling contractors, and that information could be made available, and in many cases is made available to the regulator. So I think those tools and that information, Robin, is available today.
We were all in a meeting with one of the senior regulators with the DOI weeks after the incident, and I remember the gentleman came into one of our committee meetings and said that drilling will be allowed again when you can assure us that there's a 1 in 2 billion chance of this ever happening again. And I said, I can't give you that assurance that the sun's going to come up tomorrow. We had 2 NASA shuttles explode out of 150, 200 missions. What it's going to take is not just the people, and I'm going to address that in a second, but an attitude that this is a problem we need to work together to solve. That all the work can't be done on the industry side and then throw it over the wall for regulators to look at it and decide whether or not they like it and then throw it back again. There needs to be a willingness to share, a willingness to work together, a willingness to go to training and development together. One of the problems we have right now at the IDC, we used to have regulators come to IDC conferences for training. They don't want to be seen with us anymore. And it can't be that way. There needs to be a spirit of cooperation, a spirit of partnership. And we try to tell them that the energy security of this country is in a balance here. And if we're simply going to put up hurdles after hurdles after hurdles, and when we jump over that one, jump over another one, then we're never going to get back to drilling. Now, the people thing is something that I've been beating the drum on for the last 5 years, the big crew change that we're all affected by. I'll tell you, in deepwater drilling and high-spec drilling, the people to run the assets that are being constructed don't exist today. They don't exist for every one of them. And so we all have to train up our people as quickly as possible. And we were this way before Macondo. We had to give people 10 years of experience in 2 years before Macondo. Now what you have is the government and the regulators are going to draw in that same population pool, and all the independent consulting firms that are going to be required to review what we're doing are going to pull in that same personnel pool. So I've been saying that the single most important strategic challenge we have as an industry, as a drilling industry, is the recruitment, training, and development of people to run these high-quality, high-spec assets. And one of the biggest problems that I think the regulators have, and we have, is the people just aren't there today, and so the training and development needs to be intense. On a job, off the job, it needs to be intense. And we would personally be very willing to work with regulators to help them in our training processes so that we could solve tomorrow's problems.
Eric, have you ever seen an industry face a problem like this before?
Well, I mean, I think if we go back a few years, there were plenty of opportunities. I was on the board at NOIA, and NOIA spent a lot of time setting up presentations and lectures at MMS in New Orleans or Herndon or wherever on subjects that the government was interested in. You know, tell us what's happening with ROVs, or what do you mean by underbalance drilling, or whatever the subject was. We would get experts from industry to go in gratis and do a brown bag presentation and answer questions and provide contacts for people to go forward. That's not happening, I don't think, today. My one suggestion that's kind of off the wall is we've got this great crew change. What I would suggest is that as we see people retiring from industry, that they sort of be given a secondment, if you will, at the company's expense to spend a year or two as mentors or proctors working within the BIMR to help train a younger generation, so that at the end of the career, the guy has already made all the mistakes he's going to make, but now he knows a lot of stuff that these other guys don't. And if you could get those people in, and I've suggested that to Michael, that get some of those guys in on a temporary year, 18-month, 2-year basis, and let the companies pay for it, but provide people that are experienced to help raise the standard, if you will, of the inspectors and the regulators.
But are you aware of any other industry, the aerospace industry, or the...
Well, I mentioned the INPO earlier. Yeah. That's a case where apparently the SEC has set the rules aside, at least for companies going into each other's utility facilities, and the nuclear plants will have inspections twice a year where people come in from their competitors and judge their performance in terms of safety and reliability. It's entirely possible that you could adopt something like that. I'm sure it wouldn't be comfortable to start with, but many of these people are limited partners in each other's wells, and they have some review capability anyway. So that there is a precedent for doing it.
Kemp?
Just, I guess the thing I'd say, the good news is, whether you're the regulator or the industry, we want to make sure this never happens again. So there's an absolute commitment there. I would also say we're actually doing a lot of talking between one and each either right now, but what we're not doing is working together, and that's what we need to do different. So, and I thought when Chuck mentioned, the one thing we're trying to do is get to one set of standards that we're all going to work to. And we're talking about how we're going to come together to the industry to raise our standards together through our own peer pressure force that will allow a different way to actually regulate, if you see that. So I think this is where we need to work together between regulator and industry. How are we going to walk our way up to an industry that can give the assurance to the public that something like this is not going to happen again. But it's not about just talking. It's actually about having a commitment to get there and being able to work back and forth together on that.
The model on safety, you have the nuclear question, and the nuclear industry went through 3 Mile Island, and this industry is sort of having its 3 Mile Island. But one of the questions is, in safety case, for example, it's meant to be best practices and constant improvement and shifting of risk to the companies. But this question about looking at other companies and companies kind of getting into each other's safety books, if you will, is that realistic, or to what extent is safety operations a proprietary kind of aspect?
Well, I think, first of all, many of us already do peer reviews on each other in terms of some of our well designs. It was referenced before, but it's very typical where you've got multiple companies in a well that you do a peer review. In fact, we invite peer reviews even to go outside some of the companies, because that's one way to get 3 or 4 eyes. So there's nothing wrong about opening up your plans and getting suggestions so that you can hopefully get best practices as part of your plan. I think as we go forward, there surely, to me, I think it only makes sense that we find some way to have a repository for best practices in our industry, so that as Kent learns something or Gary learns something on the other side of the world, we don't have to wait for it to, by osmosis, work back to the Gulf of Mexico, that we've got a way to do it. We do it in our own organizations all the time. We have a way to communicate immediately near misses or opportunities or failures we've seen, so that we can communicate around, and we need to work. I think it's one thing that I would certainly support, is to enhance the ability to share information between all companies, service providers, producers, operators, on things that we can enhance the safety of our operations.
Gary?
So, I think it wasn't too long back in my career where I recall discussions where industry viewed safety and safety performance as a competitive differentiator. I don't think industry is there anymore, and if, there's a few big lessons you can quickly take away from Macondo, is when you have an incident like that, the entire industry is in the barrel. So I think we're beyond that. If I understand the Presidential Commission report, I think the suggestion there, with all due respect to Chuck, because I do think as an industry we are starting to share best practices, but I think the expectation from the National Commission is we're going to go beyond sharing best practices, and we're going to start holding each other accountable, and that's a tough one. Because we, although we tend to share things, we're also competitors, and there are a lot of agencies that help us with that by watching to make sure we remain competitors and don't get too close to one another. But I do believe we've got a challenge before us as an industry as we start thinking about that recommendation and how do we kind of help ourselves walk up the ladder, as Kent says, but have some accountability in it. Because without the accountability, I don't think that is delivering the traction that the Commission was expecting in their recommendation. In my personal conversations with the Secretary and the Director, I know that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for something with a lot more traction, and we're working it right now. We're actively debating it, and hopefully we'll be able to overcome that. But that is a tough nut to crack.
Everyone keeps talking about operators and service companies, but one word is never used, and that is the other partners. And what is the role of the partners? Are they passive, or how active are they actually going to be in the operations? And is that relationship going to have to change? Gary, what do you think?
Well, I can assure you, in Chevron, we looked, as just all companies did, they self-examined their processes, and one of the things, in the past, we have looked at a partnership where we're the non-operated party, and we've looked at that and we've asked ourselves, where can we make the most influence and create the most value in this partnership? And in areas where we felt we couldn't, then we were kind of off of that. And I think we are challenging that now and actually rethinking whether there can be any off, and whether we need to be verifying and testing and challenging the operator in all phases of the game, from beginning to end. And so, I think we're going to take a much different approach going forward towards protecting our interests in non-operated joint ventures.
Ken? Go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to that, because from an independence perspective, we almost always in deep water are in a partnership situation, and clearly our views have changed as well in terms of what we're looking for in a partner and how involved we're going to be, especially if we're a non-operating partner. And I think it for everyone that's in the deep water now, as we look at partnerships, in the past we may have been looking at how good of a prospect is it, and do we want to participate in that prospect. Now it's going to be an equal discussion as to how prepared is the operator, what are their systems and processes and plans, and I would expect it to be turned on to our company as well, that we would be examined in terms of not only how good of an exploration prospect it is, but what is our execution capability and how have we prepared, and how, and I would expect that as we go forward, we will see more involvement by the non-operating partners in all phases of the operation. It's not going to be that they're just sitting back waiting for a daily report. They're going to have people assigned. It may even be the case where they are in the organization if it's a very large critical operation, but there's going to be more involvement by all the partners because we share liability. We realize that.
Ken?
Yeah, using Gary's example, we're all in the barrel. We're all determined that it's going to be different. Not only are we working together differently here in the U.S., we are working with different places. For instance, the North Sea, they have a couple of organizations over there, Osprey and the OGP. We've been connected with them like we've never been before. And actually, there's some things for us to learn from them. In the API, we've looked at the nuclear industry, we looked at INPO, we've looked at the chemical business and responsible care. So I think we're looking very broad on what we can do. And I think through the use of technology that we all have, we're going to have our partnerships, and whether it's operators or contractors, much more tightly connected going forward. And if we can all benefit from the collective brain, we're all up for it. There's not a lot of pride of ownership on that anymore. So.
Eric, do you see this as a big change for the industry and how they run things?
Well, I guess we'll see the evidence when we walk into a data room and there's a big safety case sitting in front of us. But I do think it's a change, and I think that historically people have, attempted to say, well, if I'm a non-operating partner, I'm a financial investor, and I'll just wait and see what happens. And I don't think that's going to fly, regardless of what the lawyers say. You're going to be in the firing line, in the crosshairs, so to speak.
Lou, from the standpoint of a service company, and you sort of the chain of command to operators, and now will that change how you work as well?
It very definitely changes the way we work. I wanted to address the question you asked about competitive practices with safety, and do you hold it to yourself or not? I guess I'd say that through the API, the IDC and NOIA, the systems exist for us all to share best practices. The real competitive differentiator is intoned at the top. The real competitive differentiator is how well does a company walk the talk. And it starts at the corner office and it works its way all the way through the culture of an organization. And the CEO or the COO or the head of operations can't do it alone. It's got to be a culture that is built from the top down to bottom up and side to side. That's the competitive differentiator. And as hard as everybody tries, not everybody gets there. And what's changed for me is I've become the company's chief safety officer. To get on the phone to give pep talks to rig hands, and to go around and do everything we do on a daily basis with an eye toward safety. Even pre-Macondo, we had hired DuPont to come in and assess our safety practices from the bottom up, top down, and we're spending a lot of money doing that pre-Macondo because we saw that as a competitive differentiator. And it will be a competitive differentiator because the operators are insisting on it, which means companies need to have the focus on it, then they need to have the size and the scale in order to be able to deliver on it.
Okay. What are the changes that the industry has adopted since Macondo accident? Are they enough to ensure better safety offshore, or do you believe that more changes are going to be needed? I'll start at the other end this time with Kent.
Well, I think I sort of said it earlier. I do believe we've made a lot of changes. We've made a lot of changes in prevention, and we've also made a lot of changes in how we would respond. Things that we did during the Macondo response based on what didn't work and what did work, we've almost flipped around how we would do it in the future. And you saw earlier about MWCC. That's something that we've done as an industry, and we will be much better prepared. So I think we're doing things already. There's things we're working on today that we haven't got completely figured out that will go beyond that. But I do sense there's this mindset, and I know we're committed to it, of not having then, when sort of maybe this isn't in the front of our mind all the time, 2, 3, 5 years out, how do we keep that continuous improvement mindset? Because we will be going deeper, we will be taking on more challenges, we'll be advancing the technology. We need to make sure our drilling safety technology and our response capability advances at the same pace. And so I think that's really important. And right now, my sense is we are committed to that, and we need to stay committed to that.
Eric, one of the questions, how do you keep energizing an organization, so that it, or, I mean, frankly, the statistic that the industry produced 24.7 billion barrels and lost 1,715 barrels in the process, you could argue was either very good news or very bad news. And how do you keep organizations, how do you keep the momentum year in and year out? This is constant upward improvement.
In statistics, we worry a lot about black swans. And you heard some discussion earlier about, was this Macondo incident a black swan, or was it systemic? I tend to feel it's more the black swan category. We're never, ever going to be able to go swear on a stack of Bibles that there'll never, ever be another spill. What we can say is that we can reduce the probability, that we can reduce the impact, the severity, but nobody who's honest is going to be able, if human beings are involved, they're not going to be able to say we will never, ever have another accident. One of the gorillas in the room, as far as I'm concerned, is the attempt to sort of dismember API. And I would also make the point that API has been at this for, since 1924, something like that. And yes, they are the lobbyists for the industry, but on the other hand, if you get rid of API and all of the experience and skill sets that have been built up there, what are you going to replace it with?
The commission didn't say get rid of it, the commission said split it.
Well, they did, but one of the thoughts we had was the idea that SBE is a similar organization without that lobbying capability. But it's used to putting together committees to advance the science, so to speak, to look at new techniques. And I'm not in favor of getting rid of API or splitting it, but if that action becomes inevitable, I would suggest that you might want to lodge it in some other structure that's already in the business of cooperative analysis. And it would also give you the bonus that you now have an international forum, so that you don't put the U.S. at a disadvantage competitively by saying, well, we're going to do it this way, and the rest of the world says, great, you do whatever you want, we're going to go to Brazil, which all of us would tell you is a distinct possibility if you push too hard.
Lou, how do you see this?
Well, I think one of the big changes we see happening in the industry right now is in order to address the Macondo situation, we see people, process, and equipment changes taking place around the world. And that's one of the big differences here. In the past, when there was an accident in the North Sea, new regulatory regime came into place in the North Sea, and some of it spilled over to other parts of the world, but not all of it. What we see in all of our operations is operators, it doesn't matter if they're in the U.S. Gulf or in the Mediterranean or in Brazil or West Africa, they want to live up to the highest standards possible. Drilling contractors want to live up to the highest standards possible. And so the spillover effect is going to be quite large compared to any other accident that happened in the past. The risk is that it's overkill in many respects for political reasons, because as Eric mentioned, you can't reduce the risk to zero, and if we have regulators that are trying to reduce
the risk to zero. You
just by not drilling, yes, they've done that. So the risk is that it's overdone, and it's overdone not for protection reasons, but for political reasons. And that will have dramatic impacts on the future of this industry. Wells will take longer to drill. They'll be more expensive to drill. Not so many of them will be drilled. and the ability to meet worldwide growth and demand will be significantly neutered. And so there's a lot happening here right now. There's a lot happening that's going to impact this industry in the very long term.
One of the things that happened was another large drilling company took $1 billion impairment and wrote off a bunch of equipment. Do you see, and I'd be very interested, Lou, obviously from your standpoint, but from also the companies, do you see equipment being shed from the industry, old iron kind of, and you know?
You know, there used to be this thought that a rig can stay alive forever. You just need to keep doing steel replacement. What we see right now is, you know, our customers want the best equipment possible, period, and are willing to pay more for it. That's what's happening in the jackup world. We have, you know, over 500 jackups in a 350 jackup demand world, yet we're building more because customers want the newest, the safest, the highest spec. And so yes, it's putting tremendous pressure on the lower end of the rig population, particularly in the jackup world, but in the floating world also. All of these new ultra high spec, ultra deep water rigs are going to start pushing the lower spec deep water into the midwater and the midwater into idle categories. And so we see a definite bifurcation happening of the rig fleet around the world.
Gary?
And from an operator's perspective, I'd say it's not a bad thing, because I do believe that we have in the past been guilty of utilizing assets beyond what would be considered a good, safe margin. So and as long as the rates in the industry support it, this new equipment coming in and moving the top tier assets to the middle tier to the bottom tier, and retiring steel on the back end of it, I think it is a good thing, and the operators are demanding it, and hopefully we'll be willing to continue to pay for it. Lou?
Hopefully.
But Gary, do you see other changes that the industry is going to have to adapt beyond what it's already done?
In response to this, to the Macondo and trying to get back to work, you know, Robin, it would be easier for me to tell you what hasn't changed than what's changed, because just about everything that we touch has been impacted. There have been some things that we had in place, but we feel we can improve them. There were things that were clearly missing that we now have in place. We've taken robust designs and moved them to another level of robustness. And so, I just want to repeat, I think it's what I'd like to do is to see industry have a chance to demonstrate to the regulator and to the public just how much progress we've made. I could bore you to death with the amount of work that was done in the joint industry task groups to move the bar well beyond where the regulations are and where the regulator envisions industry needs to be. We're there. The last piece of equipment that the director mentioned in his keynote address at lunch that we've been working on aggressively, and Clay mentioned it in his presentation, is a capping device. That's the last piece. Once we get that piece in place in a matter of days, and that is certified, all the pieces are in place. And we've done our part. We've checked every box that the regulator has asked for, and even some he didn't think about, and his team didn't think about, but industry and the joint industry group brought forward. So we just need to have an opportunity to demonstrate that we've learned from this thing, and we can execute, and we can execute without incident.
Chuck?
Well, I would agree with Gary. I think we're there in terms of meeting the standards that have been given to us for today's work. Now, we're part of a different group. We're part of the Helix group, but again, that has moved far along, and I think we are literally, again, probably just a matter of, it should be only days or a week or two of doing all the final box checks to assure that that system is tested. I mean, we all want to make sure it's tested, and I think it was said earlier, is nobody wants to deploy anything unless they're absolutely certain it works. But, you know, we have done so much, and I guess I can't even, you know, it's hard to you know, go through the long list, but it's not just equipment, it's thinking. It's how you're approaching it, mentally how you think about it, how you think about risk mitigation, how you think about change management, how you deal with processes. And this industry has made just tremendous effort. It has not been just we've all been sitting on our hands for the last, 10 months doing nothing. There's been huge efforts to get us prepared. And I think that we are ready, but that is not to say this won't be an evolutionary process, because we will be changing what wells we drill, what water depths we're on, the technology that we employ will be changing, and so we will have to continue to be flexible. But given what we want to do today, I think we have a very good set of procedures and equipment and processes that can allow us to safely go back to work. I think in just response to the other follow-up question you had, I also support the fact that the fleet will have to change. It already started on the onshore drilling fleet as we looked at the tremendous amount, well, as the industry switched to horizontal drilling, but we had to go to a higher category of rig, but also it was rigs that could operate more safely, fewer people, less human interaction with moving equipment, and the industry has been willing to pay for that because we see the benefits, and I think it will flow and is flowing to the offshore as well.
One of the subjects which has been bandied about a lot, I testified for the commission on it and all this, is really safety practices and safety case. Safety practice is a core fundamental aspect of a successful U.S. oil industry. What's the best way to ensure that best practices are adopted across the industry and across companies and across their operations worldwide and with service suppliers and partners and everything? I mean, one of the cases also, this is a slightly mixed question, but why is it that some companies have been operating to global standards everywhere? Is this a trend that's going to be, and how do you see that?
Well, the first question, almost the first question that we ask ourselves and that our board started discussing was, how do we go about our global business in response to what's happening in the Gulf? We have always taken the position that we had to have a global set of standards because we can't move people around and say that we've got a dual standard. In fact, in some of the other countries, Gary and Kent, they operate in many more countries than Noble does, but in the other international countries that we operate, in some instances, our standards are certainly not to the level that we're going in the U.S., but we have also made assurances to them in the past that we will operate against the highest standards. So Lewis would know, because he's got a rig about ready to go into Israel for us, is that we're making sure that that rig is completely certified and gone through the third-party verifications, just like it was ready to go to the U.S. Gulf of Mexico. And I think more companies will be doing that, want to do that, have to do that, because of it's the expectation. It will become the expectation globally, I believe.
Yeah, there were two parts of the question. The first one is the easier one to answer, and that is, for a company that operates globally, global standards are just a must, because as Chuck mentioned, as we move people and assets from one part of the world to another part of the world, so we can optimize our assets and optimize our return to our shareholders, you got to have consistency. So that one's the easy one. The other question, part of your question, was about accountability. And that is one, to be quite honest with you, having participated in this joint industry effort since the 1st of May, I'm still somewhat perplexed with. I'm not sure as an industry we are prepared to hold each other accountable to standards that are different from what we're comfortable with today. And I'll give you an example, and I know there's some folks in the audience that participated in some of this work. We learned very early on in May, as we started examining the different practices, procedures, and techniques employed by our industry, all of them legally compliant, but some very different than others in terms of level of robustness. So now we know what the top looks like and we know what the bottom looks like. Again, all legally compliant. And let's say in the new regime, they're still legally compliant. But as an industry, are we prepared to hold everybody accountable to get up to that high standard so we don't have another incident? And I think it's very easy for industry, the service sector and the operators together, to point towards those best practices, but adoption is another thing. I spent 4 years chairing a step change in safety in the UK. It was a wonderful body. The regulator was involved, the service sector and the operators, wonderful body for sharing best practices. But when it came to holding people accountable to adopting those, the group stopped. They didn't want to go there. And we are wrestling with the same thing right now in the U.S. Gulf of Mexico. Do we want to hold each other accountable? And, you know, and some people say, you know, you're sounding like a regulator now. But, you know, we have an opportunity as an industry to point towards a best practice and to help those that are not there to get there, or we can allow the regulator to do it. And to me, I think we've got a golden opportunity before us to get ourselves there and make the regulator's job a little easier. Still, they have to verify and they have to be accountable to the public, but we're accountable to this industry and to the 9 million people that work in it to get this right and not find ourselves here again. And it's, I don't know where we're going to end up, but it's something we're wrestling with right now.
Lou?
One of the biggest challenges we have in trying to establish global standards, it's easy working for Noble or Chevron or BP, but there are a lot more people that drill oil and gas wells around the world that don't quite rise to the same level of professionalism and standards globally. And so it's tough on us to make sure that our people understand that we have to operate to the same standard even if our customer doesn't demand it. The easiest way for me to be sure that we operate at a high standard is have tough customers, because when they demand it, I don't have to. But when we don't have a tough customer, then we have to get more involved in making sure that our own standards are lived up to around the world, which then gets into customer selection. I think you're going to see from a drilling contractor perspective a lot more selection on, am I willing to work with this customer if they don't rise to the same standard that we do when it comes to safety.
Are you prepared? I mean, one of the questions that's going to come up are some of these national oil companies and things like that, which may be less safety and more price sensitive. You know, and is there a chance that there's going to be kind of a gray market in service by service providers that don't meet those standards but are a lot cheaper? Is there a chance of that happening?
Unfortunately, the contracting market is a very fragmented market. There are, you know, a small number of big players, but there are a large number of small players, and
particularly in the jackups.
Yes, yes. So you will see drilling contractors that operate to a lower standard, and you will see operators that do not demand a high standard.
There's good news there, though, Robin, and I will say, and again, in the last 3 or 4 years, a lot of our national oil company partners are now demanding very, very high performance in the area of safety and environmental. And it's very encouraging, because I think in the past we were worried when we come in with a very high approach towards operational excellence, and that comes with a cost. Is the national oil company going to be willing to pay its fair share? And, you know, I've sat in sessions before in the past where there was a little arm twisting and a little poker playing to kind of get that through. That's not the case anymore. You know, just about all of the national governments, international governments, national oil companies now are starting to demand very high performance levels in the area of safety and environmental performance. So I'm very encouraged, and hopefully that, you know, that bad market is going to eventually not have any clients to pick it up any longer.
I think from an NOC perspective, I agree. I'm talking really about the smaller independents, the international independents, the ones that aren't based here and living in this system. That's where the bigger challenge is.
I think one of the things we saw in Macondo, it's a number of companies working together to perform a task. And when you have a breakdown of how that happens, that's a problem. And if you think of the way we are today, where you have, not only do you have different operators that might have different standards, but you got different contractors that might have different standards, and they all sort of, the contractors work for the different operators. And if you think of the individual trying to do the task, that's a challenge. And I think there's a real opportunity for us, and this will be a challenge for us as an industry, because historically we haven't done it, but can we come together on one set of standards, one thing to work, and then Gary's point, will we really hold ourselves accountable, or is the regulator going to help us? It's going to be one or the other. It's our choice. Either we're going to hold ourselves to a higher standard and really do it, or the regulators are going to jump in and do it. And I think a lot of us would rather do the former than the latter. So,
I think we've been arguing about compelling people to do things since Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton were having arguments. But I think we do have a couple of patterns that have worked, admittedly on a simpler problem. But after Exxon Valdez, IMO, agency of the UN, got in the act. And if the U.S. had passed a double hull law just by itself, we wouldn't have had a solution. But the IMO, because of some spills in Europe, came out and said, we will support that. And now we don't have any single hull tankers, at least not in the Atlantic ports. So if you had something like an IMO for the oil and gas industry, that it might not be part of the UN, obviously, but have some sort of an organization at a supernatural national level that could stipulate what safety cases should look like and provide some guidance. I think it would be easier on everybody on this panel if they were in a negotiation to say, well, I'd love to help you, but I'm not going to risk sanctions because you want a lower price. And I think that's kind of the way I'd like to see things develop going forward.
One of the questions that I sort of implied in my previous question, but this question about safety case specifically, and there's been discussion in Washington and again in the Commission report. Do you think that safety case is as an approach, as used in the UK and Australia and was modified in Norway and all that? Is that a sensible way to go forward, to change the fundamental logic of how we regulate? And this is called offshore oil exploration, managing risk to move forward. And the whole idea is fundamentally to shift the risk. And is this a sensible way to go long term, or do we keep a prescriptive kind of system? And you guys have all operated in both. Kent, what do you think?
well, I sort of look at, you can have a safety management system that you run everything through. You can have a safety case which is more specific to the project, or you can have a whole bunch of regulations that prescript how you do it. At least in theory, all three should work very well. What they don't do is work well at all when they're in conflict with each other. And I think what we're going to have to do is if we choose to go the safety case route, we're going to have to make sure the regulations support that and it's implemented. If we're going to go the safety management system case, and there can be some supporting, I don't want to say they're all completely mutually exclusive, but we must see how they link up. So, but this is once again where we're absolutely going to need to be in sync between industry and regulator on how we're going to do it.
Oh, I think the problem I see with a prescriptive approach, which has been what we've been operating under since MMS was created, is that it can't keep up with the technology. The technology simply changes faster than the government can change laws and regulations. So that sort of leaves you with either an all-holds-barred kind of a free-for-all, or a system where safety cases are the guiding light. What I think has some promise is this sort of self-critiquing mechanism we talked about, where every time somebody comes up with a safety case, it's not just viewed by the regulators, but it's viewed by potentially the other competitors, and they say, well, why did you do it this way? Why didn't you do it a different way? Here are 6 other options. Why didn't you consider it? It sounds uncomfortable, but I think that's probably the best solution, is to have something that's closer to the UK system.
Lou?
And we strongly support that. We think a safety case, really a custom-designed safety program for the job at hand, is really the best way to go. The risk is that the safety case is put together by people that know how to write safety cases and put them on bookshelves, as opposed to the safety case being adopted by the operation as part of their safety culture. And again, that's where the competitive differentiators come in, is those companies that can take a document and turn it into culture are the ones that are going to succeed. And so we can't overestimate how good a safety case is unless and until you know how well the company is at operating under that safety case.
Gary?
I agree. It's inevitable. I think the reason why it was taken off the table as part of this deliberation post-Macondo is because of the complexities with implementing that change. It's very disruptive to the regulator, but I think, for the reasons stated, technology moves fast and rulemaking in government rules move slow. And by the time the rules are promulgated and put in place, they're already antiquated. So the safety case enables you to adjust considerations and actions taken to the risks that are being addressed in the activity. So to me, it's inevitable. We'll get there.
I mean, we deal with a multitude of projects where this is not a cookie cutter business, especially when you get into offshore operations. So the projects are unique. The equipment that you use is unique. So I think you have to move towards the safety case approach because it has the flexibility. As the projects change or as the technology changes, it's going to be time consuming. It's going to be complex, and as Kent said, you need to be careful because it's likely you're going to end up with a combination of several prescriptive as well as looking at safety management systems or safety cases and how all those interrelate needs to be thought through very carefully.
One of the questions, and I try to talk about a little bit this morning, is competition and innovation, and really the efficiency of the market in the Gulf of Mexico is quite striking, and versus other provinces. And it's really a key element of success. And how do we keep the Gulf of Mexico as a competitive environment for different size companies? And one of the, coming back, what has to be changed, there's a critical question of liability. And that's an outstanding issue. And it's going to be difficult for independents to get permits to go ahead until the liability issue is solved, I would think.
Well, I think, liability evolves out of risk. I mean, we all deal with liability in our business. That's one of the things, we always had spill liability. There was, if you get into the discussion of caps and things like that, but we have spill liability, and the way you manage liability is through managing risk, because there are some things in your business you just can't say, I've got an absolute, I can insure it away. There's something, we can all get insurance, but you can't get insurance for the scale of things that we are deal with. So we've got to, again, get back to, the way to manage liability is to get the likelihood of a serious event down to as close to zero as possible. And that means standards, processes, people, all the things that we've been talking about here.
Is that good enough, though? I mean, somehow you have to speak to, because Congress or somebody's going to want to know, well, what is the liability and who's liable, and are they financially capable?
Right, and they're going to ask those questions, and the view that the cost of an event has gone up as a result of Macondo. It's opened people's eyes. There are certainly some things that what we've all talked about should, heaven forbid, if it should happen again, should greatly reduce the cost, because part of it is the capping systems, the intervention, all of the things we've been talking about. So I think one thing is that as you look at those who choose to operate in the Deepwater Gulf going forward, first of all, they've got to invest in these systems, whether consortiums or whatever, because that is helping them manage their liability and certainly prepare them to meet the standards that we're talking about. We're all going to have to examine our balance sheets very closely. There will be some who will likely choose that it's just there's too much liability for them to bear, and they'll transition their business to somewhere else. But I think there will still be a forum for a broad variety of companies to participate. The Deepwater Gulf has a lot of different prospects. Some of the ways that we manage liability is just in how much of a particular prospect we take on, whether we take on 10% or 50% or 100%. That's another way that you can manage liability if you are a different scale player.
Gary?
I agree with everything Chuck has said. I think some people believe, or some people have been surprised in comments that I've made in Washington, being from a major international oil company, that we need to have a diversity of players in the Gulf of Mexico to be successful. Our minnows, the small companies, typically are the entrepreneurs when it comes to exploration. And so we need to protect that. We don't want to have just 3 or 4 stodgy majors in the Gulf of Mexico. Our portfolios are too diverse. Right, of course. Our portfolios are very diverse. We've got a lot of optionality, and what we need folks to come out and be aggressive in the Gulf of Mexico. And some of our smaller companies have played that role. So, the way you could really upset the apple cart here is to have legislation come out and essentially chase all these small players out without consideration to the things Chuck just mentioned. We've lowered the probability of occurrence through prevention techniques. We've lowered exposure through a quicker response mechanism through Marine Well Containment Company, Helix, and other actions that individual companies are taking. There's no need to throw these unlimited liability or $10 billion caps that insurance companies are going to walk away from if it gets too hellacious, and there's just no need for that. So if they just let the market work and just give industry a chance to show what their work in prevention, intervention, and containment has accomplished, I think we'll have a system that will continue to function and be competitive. Where we're going to get balled up is if we get some arbitrary legislation that drives the liability market wacko.
Lou?
I'm going to answer your question from a different direction. We live in a fossil fuel world. Whether we like it or not, we live in a fossil fuel world, and it's going to be that way for our lives and probably for our children and grandchildren's lives. If you look at the exploration and development of oil, it's purely a profit-making exercise, and only those that can afford the risk to make the profit should be in it, and you don't see any benefit to society. Then you can start talking about that only those that could write $20 billion checks and clean up major spills deserve to play. If you see it as a critical element of your economy, a critical element of your national security, and a critical element of society benefiting from what we're doing, then you understand that society needs to absorb some of the risk of what we're doing for the good of society. I'll tell you, I'm coming at it a different way. It's easy to say, well, you ought to be able to write a check for whatever you cause, but if that's the case, then we're going to shut down a significant amount of exploration in this country, a significant amount of development. We're going to become even more dependent on foreign sources. And we're sitting here right now with only 5 million barrels a day of production capacity, which is about equal to OPEC's spare capacity. We could totally dry up, and OPEC can fill that up. But next time we have to go into a military conflict in the Mideast, where we're going to go to. Today I don't even know where we're going to go to. If the Suez Canal shuts down, where we're going to go to. So unless and until our government sees what we do as being critical to our national success, then we're going to be asking questions about, should you be able to write a $20 billion check in order to drill an exploratory well in the Gulf of Mexico? To which I say, absolutely not.
I think there's a couple of things to remember. One is the government is the landlord here. The landlord is ultimately responsible in most transactions. Another point is that the $75 million cap on third-party liability, which is all in all of our minds, exists for a reason. It was essentially a response to a tanker spill. But the number happens to work out to about what the available capacity is worldwide, most of which is not domiciled in the U.S. It's in Lloyd's, it's in Munich Re, and it's in Switzerland. And until you can convince the legislators that they don't control the insurance market of the world, you're going to get these sort of populist proposals to raise it to $5 billion or whatever without any consideration of how to bring that about. So to me, the talk about raising the caps should call out for a rapid brown bag lunch, if you will, about what the insurance capacity is and how it's not a U.S.-driven market.
I'm in a similar place. History clearly shows having the diversity of players has been a great benefit not only to our industry but our country, and we wouldn't want to lose that. Now, we are doing certain things that allow us to share. So whether it be MWCC, whether it be how we're going to work together as an industry, and talking about different names about what we might call how we're going to ratchet ourselves up, we'll put the pressure in place to take us all up to a lower probability of something happening, and then the ability to respond and minimize the impact. The big dollar impact, of course, we can't overlook. It was the loss of lives that was the most tragic part, but the dollar impact was as a result of the spill. And how are we going to be set up to absolutely minimize that? We will have to find a way to cross the bridge on the liability piece, but I would hate for us to get so focused on that we lose the importance of having that diversified industry, what it's done for us, and that we've done a lot of things to actually mitigate so that we don't have a similar incident to Macondo. And I think that's taken us a long way. We need to keep working the liability piece, because I'm not sure that's clear yet.
I've been getting a lot of questions, in case you notice. I'm trying to weave some of them in, but one of the questions that came in, which I think kind of keys off of this and is related, is, are you concerned with your relationship with the Gulf communities, local industry, tourism and fishing, state and local government, and the unions? Do you have a sense that, has all that changed, or is there actually a new understanding and appreciation on both sides, or where does that stand, do you think?
Well, I think as the impacts have flowed out, we all recognize that there is a interrelationship among all of those. We've got tremendous economic impacts by having our industry basically idle right now, which spreads through the Gulf community, but also everyone understanding that the industry is very large, but it also has to coexist with a fishing industry, a tourism, and so we can't just go off on our own without understanding, how the dynamics of how we may impact the other segments of that. So I think there's a greater appreciation today than there was in the past, but I think it was always there.
Agree. If anything, you might be surprised. I think the relationship has strengthened as a result of this crisis. I think industry has formed partnerships, new partnerships with local communities and with regional governments to help with restoration, coastal restoration, but also economic recovery. And I think, largely early on we were being judged by BP's response to the incident, but I think over time, most of my view of what's going on in the coastal states is people behind us to get back to work.
I totally agree. I think the industry's relationships with local governments, state governments, and local communities, local businesses is much stronger post-Macondo than it was pre-Macondo.
I'll be the contrarian here a little bit. I mean, one of the things that we were doing some work for the state of Louisiana, and we had to point out economically the fishing business or marine fisheries and tourism were something like 4% of the Louisiana economy. Oil and gas upstream was about 17%, and downstream was even more. So very much disproportionate until you look back at it and said, yeah, but how many fishermen are there, and how many people depend on tourism? And the voters, the percentages flip. So if we're going to get along with the population, we're going to have to provide some support, or at least some warm feeling, if you will, with those people who are in industries that may not be the world's biggest economic drivers, but they are important in terms of the environment we have to operate in. So I think that's what's going to happen.
Well, there's no standing away from it. Thousands of people's lives were impacted, and when it's your life that's impacted, that's what matters. And and of course, I'll look at it from BP's perspective. We felt we've done everything we could. There was a cap. We ignored that. We've tried to do everything we possibly could to try to help people's livelihood. When I think of all the vessels of opportunity we hired during the event, it was a lot more than we clearly needed, but we were trying to make sure that people had income. We've been trying to do everything we can to clean up so it's not a long-term event, and we need to let the science community continue to look at that. I think what we're finding is a lot of people are saying thank you. So we clearly, if I can be blunt, pissed them off early on, and we're trying to win them back by doing the right thing, and that's going to take some time, and it's tough to be in front of it, but that's the way it is.
One of the questions came is there a possibility that the industry will segment itself? That basically you're going to have kind of financial capability as a critical criteria. And are the majors going to partner only with majors and large cap independents with large cap independents and then small independents? Is this likely to happen? Because it wasn't the case in the past. And do you think there's going to be thresholds that's going to drive behavior, investing behavior?
Well, I guess I'd start out by saying I hope not, because I think having the again, as we talked before, having the diversity is important to the Gulf. Also, though, I do, going back to very earlier, believe that there will be a lot of scrutiny on partnerships, on the operating partners' capability, more involvement in the non-operating partners, and that will happen. But I certainly don't sense, and I don't hope that we will suddenly just segment ourselves and only the very largest companies will work together, and that leaves mid or small size companies to go do their own thing, because we do things. Noble is much smaller than a BP or a Chevron, but we do things with certainly with BP, and those are important partnerships. They're important from a technical standpoint, and in terms of, in many instances, just utilizing infrastructure that exists.
I agree. I don't think it's going to stratify or separate. However, as Chuck mentions, I think there's going to be a lot of thought put into who the operator is and what sort of capabilities that operator brings into the partnership. That'll be a more deciding factor than it will be size. It'll be capabilities.
If the board of Chevron is looking at a deepwater block and you have an independent or you have a major, and they say just on the ability of risk, we want the other guy's checkbook there with us too. And there's one thing from the independent standpoint and what they're going to do, but then with majors and what they're looking for. Is there a chance of that happening?
I don't think so, Robin. I really don't. I think it's going to be around the operator's ability to execute that program safely and reliably versus a balance sheet consideration. Now that could change, again, if something crazy comes out of the legislation that would force the issue, but I think if you just let the market work, people align on value drivers. That is an interest in a prospect, an interest in a project, and that typically drives a partnership and not balance sheet issues and considerations. And I hope it stays that way.
Well, from a drilling contractor perspective, the similar question is, what about the balance sheet of our customers? We only do business with customers that have a big balance sheet, because it's one thing to have a contractual indemnity, it's another thing to have the ability to fund that indemnity. And I agree with the approach that Gary just mentioned, is we're not choosing customers on size, we're choosing customers on quality. Size plays into the decision, but usually the bigger the customer, the more quality systems that they have. But like I mentioned, around the world, you do find pockets of small customers with small balance sheets that you don't want to do business with. So we're not screening customers on size, we're screening them on quality.
Well, I think there's obviously, anybody that's read a mineral lease from the MMS knows that there are such things as conditional probabilities of your liability going up, even if you have proportionality in your own arrangements. I think that what you're hearing from these folks is basically that there's no reason to change that unless the government forces their hand. if ABC Independent comes in with a hot prospect and everybody loves geology, including Chevron, Chevron's probably going to want to do business with them. It's not that they expect them to be able to stand up to a $400 million hit, but they're there because of the prospect.
I'm in agreement with what's been said. I think there will be a lot more effort put into how we choose our partners, and there will be a lot more risk based on how we do that, but I don't think it will stratify the industry by size.
Questions keep coming in. I got time for a few more questions. The couple questions. One really about drilling activity. One is there actually a backlog at Boomer for permits? How big is the backlog? Chuck?
You want me to take a shot at that? Because I have a lot of respect for Michael Bromwich, and all of my meetings with him, I felt he's been very candid. But I think he's being a little coy on that issue. No, there is not a big backlog, and that's because you couldn't get straight answers as to what it took to get a qualifying permit. So, by design, you don't have a backlog because we've been striving to get answers to the vagueness and arbitrariness that some of the new NTLs and some of the regulations that have been put in place. So there isn't a backlog technically, but there's a lot of work that has been going on. Absolutely, the demand is there, and if we can ever get, the framework agreed and locked down, then there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to hit the system, which is worrisome in itself, because now you got a fragile regulator with a huge chunk of work coming through, and it'll be like drinking out of a fire hose. So, but he suggests, it's your problem. You don't have any permits, and that's where I start getting a little offended, because we've been trying to nail down now for about 6 months. What do you want? What do you mean by this? And it's, I don't know. Why don't you tell me what you think I meant, and I'll react to it. And we've been doing this back and forth now for several months. And I think we're at the end. We are very close, but there is a backlog of work.
I think, too, when you look at planning, BIMR's own numbers will say that there's something over 124 things that were submitted. Maybe 5 of them were withdrawn for additional inputs, and there were another 13 or 14 that were granted, all of them in shallow water. And there's 109 left, kind of on the docket that are in process. And that's not been the traditional pattern.
One's a backlog.
Define backlog.
Yeah, define backlog. I agree with what's been said. Is a lot of it is just in definitions. We were drilling 2 wells at the time of the moratorium, and we've been spending months trying to get those 2 wells re-permitted so that we could go back to finish them. And a lot of it is just a back and forth dialogue and trying to understand what the requirements are. I don't know how many times we've resubmitted them. I do know that the document has grown in size, so that it's huge, but we're working through it, and I think we're getting close. But we need to, once that template is understood, I think there will be a very large backlog, because this industry is ready to go back to work.
There's a classic case that just happened a couple of weeks ago. Shell finally got the permit accepted, not approved, but just got a permit accepted to drill 3 new wells near Auger. Auger's been discovered since '84, something like that, but they have to file a new EIS permit. We've been producing from, I was working on the facility when it was built in the 90s, and they are insisting on a completely new EIS statement study related to this field that's adjacent to Auger. I think that's a little excessive.
I don't really have a lot of visibility on the permit backlog in the U.S. Gulf right now. We don't have any rigs working in the U.S. Gulf right now.
Well, I think it's all been said well. Rather than debate the backlog, We've learned a lot. We've made a lot of changes. Surely we weren't sitting there not working up new prospects. We weren't expecting to have all these rigs not working. There's work to be done to add reserves for this country that has all sorts of benefits. We need to move forward.
There's another backlog that I worry about, and that is when you look at the inventory of prospects and leases that the industry has. And you know, all of us had long-term plans, and we had plans on how that we would test and develop a number of these. And I'm very concerned that, you know, we're just seeing the first part of the problem here, and that is we've had a timeout. Now we talk about going back to work, but not going back to work, as we heard the director say, at a pace anywhere near, I added that, not at a pace that we were before. So we've got a lot of potential resources out there that we as an industry are going to have to restack because otherwise we're not going to get to them. And so there's a bit of a concern there. That's still an issue that we're facing because some of us are facing leases that are expiring that, you know, yeah, we might be able to go back and get some suspensions or extensions on that, but that's only just a minor part of the problem. That just is pushing it back because the real backlog is all the opportunities that we see in the deep water Gulf of Mexico that potentially we're not going to be able to go after over the coming years.
Two quick questions. One is, you know, oil prices are very robust. Gas prices are not. Have gas prices affected your appetite for risk for certain plays in the Gulf? Chuck?
Well, we don't operate on the shelf, and since we're out of action in the deep water, it hadn't really changed anything.
It's really a shelf play.
It is, you know, I would think it's more of a shelf play. Maybe Gary would have some.
Yeah, so what it has affected is where we're putting our money. So to the extent that we can put off the opportunity and preserve it by becoming a little more oily in terms of our capital program, that is happening. To the extent you have that opportunity. Sometimes you have to act on an opportunity or you'll lose it because of lease terms or whether it's an active producing lease or not. So in some cases you find yourself having to make those tough decisions about do I preserve the lease or let it go. But for the most part, we've been in a position where we've been able to move our investment portfolio more towards the oil side.
Price is driven by supply and demand. If you got too much supply, there's no sense continuing to add to more supply. If you got higher price because you need more supply, then we ought to do it. So we try to focus on where's the supply needed, and like Chuck said, we don't operate on the shelf either, so there's not that, but we certainly operate on shore. So.
Well, I would just say, you know, that you don't see too many independents leaving to go to the Haynesville Shale this week, so you know, I think that the low prices are finally having some effect even on the onshore drilling.
Lou, you're welcome to answer this, but that isn't.
No, we built 3 ultra-deepwater drill ships to drill for oil in the Gulf of Mexico, 2 for BP.
All right.
And we're waiting to do that.
This is the last question. It's actually a good question. What is your opinion of how active the industry will be in the deep water and the ultra deep water Gulf of Mexico in 5 years, including what do you think will be the number of rigs?
Tell me what the regulatory environment's going to be.
I know. What is your assumption?
Who's the president going to be?
What do you think?
We're very bullish. I mean, we think, you know, in the end, I've always subscribed to the notion that in the end, rational minds will prevail.
But remember Winston Churchill,
Yeah.
who said, you know, the Americans will always be counted on to make the right decision after they've tried everything else. So.
So we're still very optimistic. We've got a very ambitious plan for the next 10 years for the deepwater Gulf of Mexico, and I'm not willing to let go of that yet. So, you know, I think it is going to take a while for us to recover. You know, we probably won't recover at the level that you would have gotten had we not had this postponement in drilling. But I think we'll be back at it. And I think 5 years from now it'll look strong. And as long as the inventory of prospects is there, I think the activity is going to be there.
Chuck?
Well, I go back that we do have a large inventory, and we want to get back to that. I think from a planning perspective, though, we're having to take the approach that it's likely to be less than what we had in a plan a year ago, and so we're looking at how we allocate capital going forward. But we expect to be there, and again, tell me what the regulatory environment is like, and I think that's going to drive a lot as to what we can do, because if we are being squeezed back because of a permitting process that just won't allow the flow of permits, that's going to drive the capital investment.
If you'd have said 1 year or 2 years, I wouldn't have known how to answer it, but I think 5 years is a very long time. I agree with Gary. I think rational minds will prevail. I think the impact on the economy of the United States, the impact on national security will become much more obvious. I think whether it's Congress or the Senate or the different president, different minds will prevail. I mean, we're watching entire countries being created. I mean, look what's happening to Brazil as a result of the government partnering with the natural resources business and having a co-ownership in it. In every other country we work in, the government is there wanting you to succeed, not wishing you to fail. And I think we'll get to the point sometime soon where the government realizes the opportunity that's being missed here.
I think you look at you take some solace from the fact that we have this 5 million supposed barrels of surplus capacity or swing capacity available to us today, all as a result of a recession, not because we suddenly found a bunch of new capacity. And EIA and IEA are both forecasting that goes away in 2 years. So it goes away, then you get volatility and price spikes, and it will only take a couple of price spikes before the U.S. population, maybe for the wrong reasons, but I think the U.S. population will say, quit screwing around and go back to producing.
The Gulf of Mexico Deepwater Basin is one of the best basins in the world. It's a leader for what happens in the rest of the world. If you think of how important it is for the country in terms of security of supply, balance of trade, jobs, it's hugely important to it. It would be a shame if we were so conservative that we didn't maximize what we just learned. So it's sort of like you just stay on the practice field and never play a game, you're never going to get better. We have learned, we need to put it to work and continue to grow it. So I hope, as others said, I hope the regulations don't cause us to be conservative. We need to take advantage of this resource and do it in a way that I know we're all committed to do it.
Good. On that note, I want to thank the panel, and I think we have some closing words. Thank you, George.
Well, you've been an extremely athletic audience, staying the whole day since the morning, and so I'm only going to say like 2 minutes and then close our session. I want to thank all our speakers for their contribution today. It was really, really interesting discussion on an incredibly complex topic, a wide range of insights that we've seen over the day. As a person who, my students who are here, let me just say, when you do the paper at the end of the semester, just think about what I'm about to say, because my thesis for college was on the Egyptian Revolution, right? And so I make this comment with the full knowledge of the historical background, that we cannot anticipate the changes that are going to come across the Middle East over the next 5 to 10 years in light of Robin's last question. It is, all I can tell you is that it's going to be, I think Robin used this word before, it's going to be tectonic. We're going to see so much change in the Middle East that the picture for the oil market is going to be dramatically different. And the question about whether we have the right technologies to drill safely in the Gulf of Mexico, whether we have the right technologies to drill in the Arctic, to drill in deep water around the world, is going to be a question of critical importance, because the ability to just count on the 5 million barrels a day of spare capacity in the Middle East may be a very difficult, I hope not, but could be a much more difficult prospect in the coming years than it is today. And So I have this thing, myself and other people from the industry today, when the accident first happened, we all thought of the space shuttle disaster and the complication it took to send a man to the moon and the technology that NASA's developed and the scientific expertise that went in that. And I guess I'd leave you all with sort of a parting thought, which is that getting this right, in light of what's happening in the Middle East today and the volatility we're already seeing in oil prices and the possibility that we could see even more volatility in oil prices, getting these containment systems online, getting the regulations right and getting them right quickly, getting the technology into place to be able to go deeper in places like Brazil and other spectrums. This is going to be like the race to the moon. But the difference is going to be that in the race to the moon, it was just sort of an intellectual thing, that we couldn't let the Russians beat us. It was sort of a mindset. Whereas this is going to be something that's going to be completely necessary to have economic growth and prosperity worldwide return, not just for our country, but globally. And the amount of innovation that's going to be able to be done or needed in a short period of time is going to be really large. And I don't think the people watching CNN every night understand what the challenges could be moving forward. I mean, they could be huge. So I just encourage you all to go home back to your design mats and really work on these issues, because this is going to be very important, and we're going to be in a very different world over time. And as people have said, I believe in the new technologies that are going to come from the clean tech world, but there's a timeline issue in terms of when we're going to need to get up in the morning and get to work, and when the new technology will be able to be proliferated into the market. And so we need to really understand how important our industry is. I know some of you feel a little embattled over the last year, but it's not about being popular, it's about being necessary. And I came into the business at the end of the 1970s. It was really amazing to see what the industry did after '79. I remember going to the Offshore Technology Conference Robin sent me in 1990, and everybody was talking about Petrobras's little bunch of successes, and Shell was unveiling Auger, and everybody said, maybe one or two other players will be able to do deep water because the technology is so difficult. And then I remember 6 months later, Shell bringing me over for a briefing and showing me that they had 20 or 30 prospects and just amazing production targets that we've reached in the deep water. And the numbers for where deep water was expected to go before we had this crisis was that it was going to be 50% of world offshore oil production, up from about 30% today. So it's important to get this question right. So I thank you all for spending the day with us. We really appreciate your participation, the questions from the audience, and Robin and I have the intention to make this a series, to continue to have programs on this topic over the course of the next year, and get other keynoters and other guests to come and talk about this subject. It's an important subject. So I thank you all and hope to see you again soon in the future.